The Speaker of the House of Commons kept an armed guard outside of his door during the Freedom Convoy. However, I'm not sure why, because OPP intelligence said there were no extremist threats or guns in the convoy, despite what politicians and the media were claiming. I have to show you this report from Blacklock's right now. Now, to use the language of the left, this is the perfect intersection, as they say, of liberal hysteria, liberal hypocrisy, and, of course, media lies. Let's take a look. House of Commons Speaker Anthony Rota, so of course a Liberal MP, was so alarmed by the Freedom Convoy that he had armed Parliament Hill police stand guard outside of his Ottawa residence at night while he slept. Records show Rota's office yesterday did not comment for security reasons. Detailed information about operational security is not shared publicly. Oh boy, there's a lot in there, isn't there? Now, for those of you who don't know, let's go back a step. The Freedom Convoy was a nearly 4-week-long street party protest led by truckers, but then joined by their supporters in Ottawa to demonstrate against COVID measures. Rebel News was on the ground the whole time. You can see our coverage at convoyreports.com and make your mind up about the convoy for yourself. You can see how peaceful everything was. That is, until Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the never-before-used counterterrorism law called the Emergencies Act to euthanize the protest, arrest peaceful protesters, and seize their assets. Currently in Ottawa, as we speak, the actions of the government against the peaceful Canadians in the nation's capital are being examined in the Public Order Emergency Commission. That's what we're calling the Trucker Commission here at Rebel News. But first, let's start with the hypocrisy of Rota. Do you remember when Justin Trudeau said this?
And there are debates, and we have a culture where the difference is guns can be used for hunting or for sport shooting in Canada, and there are lots of gun owners, and they're mostly law-respecting and law-abiding. But you can't use a gun for self-protection in Canada. That's not a right that you have in the Constitution or anywhere else. If you try and buy a gun and say it's for self-protection, no, you don't get that. You get it for hunting. You can get it for sport shooting. You can take it to the range, no problem, as long as you go through our rigorous background checks. But there's a difference around the culture. And one of the things that we're seeing with the debate in the States is you get more and more of the American-style, right to carry, self-defense arguments filtering up through the usual more right-wing communications channels.
Yeah.
I see. So normal Canadians, we don't have the right to defend ourselves against what we see as an imminent threat to our lives with a firearm because we're not special. But the Speaker of the House of Commons, who was definitely not threatened at all, but maybe he was a little hysterical from too much CBC and anxious because of all these scary truckers in Ottawa and their evil hot tubs and bouncy castles. Well, he was able to, at the taxpayers' expense, offload his personal safety to an armed guard outside of his door. So they're not really against people defending themselves with guns. They're just against us defending ourselves with guns. Got it. Trudeau's disarming people like me with his repeated gun grabs and bans while ramping up his personal security for himself and all of his fancy friends. So that's the obvious hypocrisy of Rota out of the way. Let's talk about the other two things, the media lies and then the absolute hysterics. I'm going to show you separate clips from Ottawa Provincial Police Superintendent Pat Morris, who testified Wednesday at the Trucker Commission. He's talking about the high-level risk assessment on the convoy as it rolled into Ottawa. Let's take a quick listen.
Is it fair to say that at no point during the convoy protest did you receive reliable intelligence that would lead you to conclude that there was a risk to national security that would rise above the potential threat to national security that you identified in that report?
That's correct.
Okay. So no evidence that the demonstrations were any sort of national security level event. Well, that's what the Emergencies Act is for. But then he remarked on the accusations of extremism within the convoy. Listen to this.
I do not know where the political figures are acquiring information or intelligence on the extent of extremist involvement. So here, you're expressing the concern that this narrative around extremism is not consistent with the intelligence that you gathered, collected, reviewed over the course of the weeks leading up to these events.
That's correct.
There's one more clip here about the threat of firearms that I think is really relevant.
We produced no intelligence to indicate that these individuals would be armed. And there has been a lot of hyperbole about that. That was something we wish to, when people think about what happened on January 6th of 2020, that is presence of mind, but we produced no intelligence to indicate that that would be the case.
Now, let me be clear. No firearms were found within the convoy after the fact. So his intelligence was right, despite what the mainstream media and all the politicians would have you believe. It was just a blatant media lie. But lastly, Morris explains why so many people were so scared anyway. It was political malice that ultimately wasted a bunch of his time.
There seems to be a causal linkage in some people's minds between certain things that are not illegal or criminal. They just may not be in line with, and a nexus to somehow an intelligence threat. I can give you an example. I have had instances where people have approached me professionally because there were bumper stickers that had to do with entities that they disagreed with. So therefore, those people shouldn't be police officers, or they shouldn't be parked in parking lots. And I heard terminology. That person is right wing, so, and then therefore an assumption. I used to hear all that all the time about left wing, and I was very concerned about it because I worked in anti-terrorism at the time of the 9/11 attacks, and I saw what these knee-jerk reactions do, where we get information from the public on any number of issues related to what they perceive to be threats from Wahhabism or Salafism or Sunni extremism. And there always seems to be an overreach that comes with this politicization. And I've had many instances where I've been asked to go through these intelligence checks without the reasonable grounds to suspect or believe that there is a threat posed. There is merely the presence of something or someone that someone doesn't like.
Can you just confirm for me that it's fair to say that one of your concerns here is that the public discourse has become sensationalized and it's become inaccurate?
Yeah, so this is a large conversation. I mean, I think it's evident that I was concerned by a politicization, and I was concerned by hyperbole, and I was concerned by the affixing of labels without evidence to individuals, movements, etc. And if I can, I don't want to waste your time, but this doesn't just speak to this movement. I can give you a very specific example. Many people, law enforcement included, have an insatiable appetite. I can give you an example of person of interest profiles, etc. I've always been very hard and fast, no matter what the event is. I can use protests against Coastal GasLink, etc. That we don't do POI, person of interest profiles, unless we have reasonable grounds to suspect or reasonable grounds to believe that those individuals will be engaged in criminal activity or illegal activity that will present a public safety risk. And I believe that the public expects people like me in my position to consider those things in the course of my duties.
Okay. Your concerns aren't limited to this protest, but they do apply to this protest. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yep.
So no firearms, no extremism, no real threats of violence, but this hypochondriac, anxiety-ridden Speaker of the House, Rota, was expending money on an armed guard outside of his door. Now, just to add insult to injury so you can see how the media and politicians can just lie about you and get away with it, or quietly redact their stories or claim they misspoke the next day. Look at this. Ottawa Mayor Jim Watson, in sworn testimony on Tuesday, said this.
Yes, and I believe some members of council did as well, and I received one, I think one, two, or three. A couple of people were charged, and some guy from New Brunswick was coming down here with guns in his trunk to shoot me, and he was arrested.
Now, guess what? Watson claims now that he misspoke or misremembered. How can you misspeak or misremember testifying under oath that someone was coming to kill you with a firearm from another province, thousands of kilometers away? I guess you can just lie under oath and call mulligan the next day when somebody asks for the receipts. You know what I think the deal is here? The politicians have forgotten that they can't control these hearings. They can control who comes to their press conferences. They can control who gets to ask the questions. They can control which friendly Trudeau-polluted media companies they do interviews with. So they can let the lie get all the way around the world before the truth gets its pants on, normally speaking, but not now. These commission hearings are allowing the public a peek behind the curtain. And these politicians, they're being fact-checked in real time. It's the most amount of scrutiny they've had since Justin Trudeau colonized the media with his pernicious bailouts. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. Rebel News is covering the Trucker Commission from beginning to end. We've got me watching it wherever I'm at, and we've got a team of journalists in an Airbnb as a satellite HQ on the ground in Ottawa to see all of our independent coverage and to support our independent journalism in the nation's capital, holding these people to account for their lies and attacks on the Canadian public. Please go to truckercommission.com.